Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. We're going to continue looking at 1 Samuel chapter 16, though we're going to take a short diversion to review the 16th day of the first month. So I don't know how long that will take, because short is a relative term. But before we begin that, let's have a word of prayer. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we are so thankful, Lord, that we can be here once again this morning in this new week. We're thankful for the blessings of this past week, how you have worked in our lives, and the blessings of fellowship and study and the light that we have received for our feet. And we just pray, Lord, that as we open your word together again, that your Holy Spirit can speak to us and direct us and comfort us, which includes showing us our sin, your righteousness, and the judgment that can correct us. We pray for our family and friends, that your angels can watch over them, and that our interactions with others can be guided by your Spirit. And so we ask again that as we look at these things, you can correct our understanding, anything that we need to see, that you can point it out clearly to us through your word. We pray this in Jesus' name. Okay, so at the end of the study on Thursday, we were looking at 1 Samuel chapter 16, David being anointed king. Of course, we haven't really gone through this chapter yet. And Dwight, did you send me notes on this chapter yet or not?
I'll look. I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember, because we kind of were moving ahead and then we sort of backed up a little bit and went over the lines again.
Right.
Yeah. So when we look at a symbol, I struggle to make people understand. Obviously, people who have been following these studies for a long time, we sort of understand to some degree how we use symbols. And I'm doing a study with a friend of mine online on Zoom, and we're going through the lines. He's trying to catch up on some of the understanding of the line study. So I'm kind of going through that in a simplified form. And then we see people, some on Facebook posting things, dealing with numbers. I don't really like to use this word, but because people can take it as offensive, but basically it's nonsensical. It's nonsense. That is, they think they see something significant in numbers, and they think that they're doing what we're doing. But you can't just take a number out of its context and give it its symbolic import. The context has to be there in the understanding of the prophecy. And so, if somebody, looks at a date and connects it to another date and does some numerical analysis of that date, and sometimes these are pretty sketchy, a guy saying that 8 years is actually 7 years, and it's just like, you can't really do that, but he does, and I guess, it probably annoys me. It's probably the only thing that really can annoy me, is when people make mistakes and you can't correct their mistakes. That I find annoying. That they double down, on their mistakes. And of course, what we're interested in is truth. And we've made mistakes, we've made mistakes in our studies, and we want to be corrected. But we are guided by, we're going to use the word rules, and these rules, Miller's rules, but they're not all explicitly written down as a list of rules. I mean, Miller wrote down some rules, but even those rules themselves just come from the scriptures. And the main rule that guides this movement is Isaiah 28, precept upon precept, line upon line, right? So that whole idea of setting in order, that's a precept, means to set in order upon a line, which is a timeline, a measuring line, from here to here, right? That is pointing out not really locations, but you could say events, but definitely time on a line. And we know that the line is a line of judgment, and that the plummet is a waymark which we will call righteousness, that it is a reform line. It's the work of God in the earth. So if we're going to take a symbol like 1 Samuel 16:1, we look at a chapter and we look at the first verse and we say, well, that is a symbol, and it's a symbol of the wave offering. It's not arbitrary in what we're doing. We look at the symbol and we say, does this apply to this line? And then we have to understand what the wave offering is, what it symbolizes within this movement, and what it symbolizes primarily, where that symbol comes from, in order for it to have meaning. And that symbol has had meaning in this movement, right? So one of the things that it has is we can take 616, just like we take 252 and 525 to get 777, and 434 and 343 to get 777. We can use 161 and 616 to get 777. And we place that on January 10th, 2021, at the end of that 10 days of prayer, where you have, how did that go again? We had 100 days of prayer, right? And then from, I forget things even. So from the 100 days of prayer in, what's this number? Shows it quite a bit, 616 days. Let's look at it this way. Okay, so that was, trying to figure out, okay, so the 100, that's why I'm getting confused here. So the 616 days and the 161 days, that was basically an inclusive count from July 18th, 2021 to December 25th, 2021. There's some other place dealing with that. Anyway, I'm going to leave that one for now because that one gets a little bit complicated. But the point is we have those divisions. So now the primary, where does the 16th day of the first month first show up in Scripture?
Don't we find this in Exodus?
Okay. Yeah. So it's going to be, I'm just typing this in. Yeah. So, I mean, as a day, like if you type in the 16th day, it's, you're not going to see that until 2 Chronicles 29, verse 17. So where it's going to show up is in the story of the, it's not going to be in Exodus. Well, it's going to be mentioned in Exodus, I guess, right? Is it, how does it go? Trying to think. The wave, well, I'll put in the wave offering. Let's see.
You had the Feast of Unleavened Bread in Exodus. You had the Feast of Unleavened Bread type in Exodus, but I don't think you had the wave offering.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So, well, in Exodus 29, it's going to talk about it. Let me see, that's going to be really what we would call the heave offering, right? So it's not going to be till Leviticus that it gets mentioned. So the thing is, when initially they're going to talk about these feasts and so forth, dealing with the Passover, you don't have the wave offering until Leviticus 26. So, or Leviticus 23, pardon me. So this is a really important point. And I don't know how to explain it as simply as I should be able to explain it. But when they're going to talk about these feasts of the Lord in Leviticus 23, remember, they have kept a Passover, right? They're going to have a Passover that initially is the real Passover when they leave Egypt, and then they're going to keep one a year later. So here, when they're talking about this, Moses is writing this in Leviticus 23. This is going to be before they keep the first Passover after leaving Egypt, right? That he's going to write this. That's my understanding. Stephen, do you have any information about when Leviticus is written? That's going to be in connection with the giving of the commandments, right? That's how we understand it.
We set up the tabernacle at the end of Exodus, and there's a date there. I think it's in Exodus 40, verse 17. And I take it that Leviticus is kind of based upon what takes place is sort of based upon that date. And then he's going to sort of give the information.
So you're saying it's going to be in the second year that he's going to write Leviticus.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I wasn't really sure about that, exactly when he writes Leviticus. Okay. Now we know he's going to write the book of Genesis, Moses is, when he's a shepherd before the Exodus, right? And then, of course, he's going to write parts of the book of Exodus. You know, he's going to write most of it. Some of it might be finished by Joshua, right? And he's definitely receives Leviticus from God, right? So this is kind of like more like the book of the law, though it would include all of the other books would be grouped with it. So yeah, so it's going to be in the first month in the second year on the first day of the month that the tabernacle is reared up. So you're saying in connection with that, he's going to talk about, where is it? He put the table, the tabernacle, bread, lampstick. You're going to talk about the book of the law being put in the side of the ark somewhere, right? Okay. I don't know if that's a really important point right now. The main thing that we need to consider here is that Leviticus 23 is talking about what's going to happen once they enter the promised land, right? So he's going to mention these feasts of the Lord. He's going to talk about the Sabbath. He's going to talk about the Passover. And then in Leviticus 23:10, he says, speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when ye be come into the land, which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then ye shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. So in my paper on the wave offering, I go into detail to show that the morrow after the Sabbath is the first day of the week, that it's not the morning after a feast day, that is Hashabbat here, the word as the Sabbath, only can refer to the seventh day Sabbath. It can't refer to a yearly Sabbath. Now, the Adventist Church takes the position, at least our scholars do, that this is referring to the yearly Sabbath being the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we know, though, that when this is given, that is not yet decided. Like he's not going to say, take it on the 16th day of the first month. And the reason he doesn't say that is because it could have been on a different day, right, if they had entered in a different year, right? Because if it's the morrow after the Sabbath, depending what year you would enter into the promised land would determine which date that was on the biblical calendar, right? Because the week doesn't always align the same with the month, right? With the dates of the month, okay? Now, this is one of the things that lunar Sabbatarians use as their primary argument why we have a lunar Sabbath, because they're going to show that many times in the scriptures that the 15th day of the month happens to be a Sabbath. And so they say, well, it's always that way. Now, we believe that it's this way in these different situations, and why it's mentioned is because that's what's going to happen at the time that Jesus is crucified, right? The 14th of Nisan is going to be a Friday, the 15th is going to be a Sabbath, and the 16th is going to be a Sunday. And so for Christ to fulfill those types as the wave offering, it needs to align with the day of the week, but it also needs to align with the calendar date. Now, the calendar date then is set the first time. So, and if anybody has questions or doesn't understand what I'm talking about, just ask. So, and then it says, we have the Feast of Weeks, right? And it says, ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that ye brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Now, this word here, again, is referring to the Sabbath day, not weeks. Okay? So it's not saying 7 weeks, saying 7 Sabbaths. And that means that you would be counting that week starting from the morrow after the Sabbath, so the first day of the week. And that means that Pentecost, when they first cross the Jordan and keep their first Pentecost, it's going to fall on the morrow after the Sabbath. It's going to fall on the first day of the week. Now, in that case, it's also going to be the the 6th day of the 3rd month, because since in that year, the 16th day of the 1st month is the morrow after the Sabbath. It's going to be the first day of the week. Then the 6th day of the 3rd month is also going to be the morrow after the Sabbath, if you count 7 Sabbaths. Now they say that you number 50 days. Well, that's because that's an inclusive count. They're counting the first day of this, which is a Sabbath, the wave offering day, and they're counting the last day. So their 50 days is what we would call inclusive reckoning, because you're referring to something as if it's a cardinal number when it's actually an ordinal number, right? It'd be the 50th day, but you're using cardinal language as if it's 50 days later, but it's really 49 days later. Okay? Is that clear to people about how that works so far? Okay. And so the other text that we look at is in Exodus 34, I believe. Is that where it is? No, I should have looked this up and remembered which verse it was. Okay, let me see if okay, it's in Deuteronomy, that's why. Okay, so in Deuteronomy is where we're going to get this Feast of Weeks. So it says, 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee, begin to number the 7 weeks from the time, such time as thou beginnest to put in the sickle to the corn. So notice here, they don't say 7 Sabbaths. You can see it's a different Hebrew number. It's not 7676. It's 7620. So why is this here in Deuteronomy when they give instructions about keeping Pentecost? Why are they saying 7 weeks instead of 7 Sabbaths? Stephen? You have to, I can't hear you.
Yeah, so they're going to be thereafter, going to be doing that. That's going to be consistently 7 weeks from the 16th day. Right.
Yeah. So that means that it's not the same. It can't be from the morrow after the Sabbath. If it was, they would just give us the same instructions, right? But they're going to say, no, you're going to count weeks, because this is the general instruction regarding keeping of Pentecost from then on, right? Now, Deuteronomy is written, though, still before they cross the Jordan, right? Because this is Moses before he dies, obviously, and he doesn't cross the Jordan. So that means Moses, at least directed by God definitely knows, but he's giving a different instruction. So this is not talking about when you first come into the land. So Moses must understand that when they cross, when the book of Leviticus is written, because it's not written at the end, it's written at the beginning of their time in the wilderness, they're going to give instructions for when they cross. But Moses may not exactly know what year they're going to cross and which day is going to be the day of the wave sheaf offering. But whichever year they cross, that date will become the date of the wave sheaf offering, right? So the first time it's going to be the morrow after the Sabbath. From then on, whatever date happens when they cross the Jordan, that date will basically be preserved. And so they never mention the date for Pentecost or the date for the wave sheaf offering. They don't say which day of the month it is. But can you see that they can't, because it's not determined yet? Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, I guess you could tell me, right? Because in these accounts of how to do this, we have 2 different descriptions, which means it's one thing that indicates to us that it's a fixed date only after the first time. Now, in my paper, so I'll direct you there. I'll go to this here. So we'll just look at it. I go through this in detail.
So when they crossed over the Jordan and come into the land, the 16th day of the first month is when they were supposed to start the count, right?
Yeah, because it's going to be the morrow after the Sabbath. So it happens to be that year, that in connection with the Passover, right? So it's going to have to be in the Passover week, right? Because it's after the Passover.
Right.
The first time you the first time that you keep the Passover, you're going to have a Sabbath day, right? Now, that Sabbath day, depending on the year that you would cross the Jordan, would have fallen in different dates. But the year in which they crossed the Jordan, that date is going to be the 16th day of the first month. If they had crossed the Jordan the year before, it'd be a different date. The morrow after the Sabbath would be a different date, right? But it happened to be that date, right? 16th day of the first month. Of course, this is God's providence, but it's not given, right? It's not a given even, right? It's you're gonna enter into the promised land the morrow after the Sabbath, after you start keeping the Passover. That's going to be when you do the wave offering. And so the first time it is going to be the 16th, but from then on it's going to vary, right? It'll be the 16th, it'll be the 17th, right? The 18th, the 19th. If they were going to look at the morrow after the Sabbath, but they're always going to keep it on the self same day. So when I deal with this first in the paper,
it's like I know this is going to sound like I'm crazy, but it's like Christmas. Every Christmas, the day is not set. In other words, we don't have a set day that they celebrate Christmas.
Right,
It's,
a set day of the week.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Unlike Easter, which is always on a Sunday, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, in this paper, I go through the Sabbath. I go through between the two evenings. I show that what the between the two evenings mean, because we need to understand the timing of the Passover. And then I deal with the morrow after the Passover, which is going to be the 15th day of the first month. That's when they leave Egypt. Deal with the Passover lamb itself. All of these different things, they're pretty detailed. And then the morrow after the seventh Sabbath, I deal with Pentecost itself. So these are the verses that we just looked at, Leviticus 23, 15 to 16, and Deuteronomy 16, 9 to 10. And then I deal with this self same day. So this is the thing I just want to look at. And now this is a ancient calendar. This is what their calendars look like. It's not something that, it's not what a calendar looks like nowadays. Come on. So all it is a piece of bone with 30 holes drilled in it. And you would take a peg, another piece of bone. And so when you came to the 29th day of the month, you would go outside that evening and you would, if you saw the visible crescent, then you would move the peg to the first position. If you didn't see the visible crescent, you'd move it to the 30th spot. So you'd know tomorrow was going to be the 30th day. Actually, at sunset, the 30th day of the month would begin. And so you could keep track of what day of the month it is with this little handheld calendar. Okay. So the word for self-same in Hebrew is the word bone, right? So every time it talks about the self-same day, literally in Hebrew, it says the bone day. That is, it's referring to a date on the calendar, not to a day of the week. Okay? So I looked up everywhere where it says self-same day in Hebrew, right? So you have this expression here, which is ad. So there's ad hetsem hayom hazeh. The hazeh part is this part of it. The et is the marking of the direct object. Hayom, that's the day. So we got the self same day. Anyway, that's the idea. And you can see that I list all these verses that use this expression or some slight variations of it, just with a little prefix to it. So I go through all these examples of the self same day. The point is, it's referring to a date on the calendar, either just a monthly date or sometimes an anniversary. What do you call a monthly anniversary? I mean, because anniversary means year, this year, but anyway, a monthly date. So like the 10th day of the first month. The 10th is a bone day, and the 10th day of the fifth month is that same, it would be the self same day, right? Whether it's the 10th day of the first month or the 10th day of the fifth month or the 10th day of the seventh month, you could compare that 10th day with all other 10th days. They would be the self same day on a calendar because you have a 30-day calendar. But also a self same day can refer to a yearly anniversary. So there's two different ways in which it can be used. Okay. Okay. So I go through all of that, what it means. They don't always consistently translate self same day, but Hebrew expression sometimes they just say same day, right? But it is an interesting expression. So the point that we have here is that the 16th day, do it this way. I guess it's in the paper. I'll just use it from the paper instead of going to the other document. Okay, so I got some charts here somewhere in this paper. I got the dates in 457. I go through all this. There is a chart here. Okay, here it is. So here we have the 40 years of the manna in the wilderness. So we can see on Sunday, May 27th, 1533 BC, that's going to be the first day that the manna falls. That's going to be the 16th day of the first month. And then 494 months, or 2,084 weeks, or 14,588 days later, on May 5th, 1493 BC, they go out to gather the manna, and there is no manna, right? So the last day the manna falls is the Friday before that. So one of the things we see in this story is those 3 days from Passover to the wave offering, typifying the 3 days that Jesus, from his crucifixion to his resurrection. If you were a lunar Sabbatarian, you would still have Sunday as being the first day of the month, or the 16th day of the month, because they just stick to that. But Karaite Jews, and some Messianic Jews, they have the wave offering moved to different dates on the biblical calendar. So it's not always the 16th. Okay. And that destroys the typology of dealing with this weekend sort of situation from the Friday to the Sunday. So lunar Sabbatarians try to preserve this by creating a lunar Sabbath. So in their situation, they don't have a 7-day weekly cycle that they can match up like we do. Now, this is important though. So one of the things that we can show is that if we have a 7-day weekly cycle from creation, all of these things are explained, right? Like, it's a lot of detail. But one of the things that I did when I looked at the dates is I wanted to know what day of the week they were in. So, for instance, if we have a weekly cycle, I'll just read this here. It says, taking the period for the falling of the manna into account allows us to confirm that the timing of the wave offering being on the morrow after the Sabbath is consistent with this being both the 16th day of the first month as well as the weekly Sabbath. We also wish to note how rare this confluence of circumstances is. A period of 40 years less a month, which is both 494 months and 284 weeks, occurs only 5 times in 19 years, or 26% of the time. The chances that this will also begin and end on the Sabbath is 1 in 7, or 14% of the time. For both these conditions to be met, it is only possible 4% of the time. For example, in a 200-year period from 1533 to 1333 BC, the only 40-year periods that meet these conditions are 1533 to 1493, which is the one we have, 1509 to 1469, 1489 to 1449, etc., right? So this negates much of the debate regarding the timing of the wave offering, at least in regard to the year of the crossing of the Jordan. This is also another confirmation.
So these dates are the dates when the 16th day was on the Sunday.
Where the 16th day of the second month, when the manna begins to fall, is on a Sunday, And the 16th day of the first month, when the manna ceases to fall, is also, and that only happens in 8 different periods in a 200-year period. So 8 different times in a possibility of starting in 200 different dates. So that's 4%, right? Yeah. So all the dates that people give for like the Exodus, people never consider this because nobody thinks about how many days did the manna fall. They just pick a date, for when they think the Exodus is, but they don't pick the right years. So I haven't actually seen anybody pick any of these years for the Exodus, except for 1533. Gerard Gerteau, he picks 1533 for the Exodus, just as we do. And he has the same 480-year period that we have as well, from 1 Kings 6 verse 1. But all of these other dates that people use dates in this range, but none of their dates match up with this example of the wave offering. Okay. So now it becomes pretty, like I go through a lot of implications of this and different people's views. I deal with lunar Sabbatarians and Karaite Jews and how that issue was understood by Seventh-day Adventists. And I deal also with Grace Amadon's calendar for 457 BC, deal with the Adventist position, which is primarily hers. The deal with the Wednesday crucifixion. But here I just got to get to the bottom. That's the Wednesday crucifixion theory, why it doesn't work. Lunar Sabbatarians, what's wrong with their problem, what problems they have. This little calendar on the timing of the feasts. This here is dealing with the flood. So I deal with some of that stuff, the days of the week in connection with the flood and why that's important. This is one of the ways I refute lunar Sabbatarians. And then the deal with Ezra. So this part here, it's going to address, where's my chart? But there's a chart here. Maybe I didn't write a chart. Maybe this isn't the finished paper. Yeah, this isn't the finished paper. Okay, so in one of my papers, I have a chart where I compare the dates that Grace Amadis has in 457 and why her dates are wrong. But because I pay attention to the days of the week in a different way than she does. And she has a wrong month. She starts the year too early, a month early. But anyway, it's not that important a point. What is important here is we have discovered something that is quite important and should be understood by Adventists, but it's not. And so what is it that the 16th day of the first month is symbolizing? So one thing we can say it symbolizes is the resurrection of Christ, right? Because it's the wave offering. Christ is going to be resurrected. Now, what does that symbolize in a line? So think about
Can you repeat the question?
So we know that Jesus' resurrection is typified by the wave offering, right? That would be its primary symbol, is to refer to Christ being resurrected. Now, he, of course, is the bread of life, right? They're going to use the grain, the barley harvest grain, to represent Christ, his resurrection. We're going to wave that. It's in connection with the Passover. So Christ is, going to die on the 14th and be resurrected on the 16th. And it's going to be a Friday and a Sunday, right? In our calendars. So what is it symbolizing? What is it? I mean, obviously it's typifying Christ, but what is it addressing as a symbol on a reform line?
Would it be 9/11?
Well, why would you put it at 9/11? So can you give me your reason?
Well, it would be because, let's see, why would I put it at 9/11? Because
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, 9/11 is what symbol in our lines? It has 2 waymarks. So what are they? So 9/11 is the arrival of the first angel, right?
Right.
The empowerment of the first angel, and the arrival of the second.
Right.
So would the 16th day of the first month be the empowerment of the first angels or the arrival of the second?
It'd be the arrival of the second.
Why would it be the arrival of the second?
Okay. Why would it be the arrival of the second? The second is is the second angel's message, which is come out of Babylon.
Yeah, yeah. So could you put Christ's resurrection as connected with the second angel? I mean, wouldn't the cross, I mean, if we're looking at the line of Christ, I mean, it just depends how you look at the line, but primarily we have John the Baptist is the first angel's message and Jesus is the second angel's message, right?
Right.
So his resurrection can't be the arrival of the second angel,
Oh, you said that. Okay.
right? Right.
All right.
So if we think it through, we have to figure out, well, what is his resurrection, and then we would need to think, well, how does that relate to our lives?
Well, and at the eighth, he's the eighth, right? So it'd be the resurrection would be the baptism would.
Well, the baptism is the baptism,
Right.
right? Because Christ is, really a primary reform line, right?
Okay.
Line. Now, I know we have different sort of ways we look at the line because there are other lines within the line of Christ. But what we can say is that the resurrection is neither the first angel or the second angel. I mean, it would probably have something to do with the third angel's message.
Yeah. Okay.
How I
I
would look.
can see it as, sorry, Theodore, I can see it as a 3 a.m. because it symbolizes the conquest of death and of sin.
Yeah. And
Righteousness
we can,
by faith.
yeah. Now, also, the line's a little more complicated than that because we know that we're also going to have, Jesus is resurrected. So that's the third angel arriving in a sense, or something to do with the third angel, which in that reform line, we're going to have then, there's going to be 40 days. Then Jesus is going to ascend into heaven. And 10 days after that, you're going to have Pentecost, right? And, how do you address that in the line of Christ? Well, we would look at, Pentecost, we usually say, well, that's the former rain, and then we got the latter rain in our history. So how do we, but, in a sense, you're looking at another line starting, right? But if we look at, Christ's resurrection, I mean, the primary thing that happens is you're going to have the first fruits, right? So you're going to have his resurrection typifying the resurrection at the end of the world.
Right.
So in some ways, we could say it's not even the arrival of the third angel. It's like the empowerment of the third angel, or typifying what happens at the end of the world in connection with the third angel. Okay. So we have to consider all of these different details about the 16th day of the first month. So the other question, I had asked a question. I kind of slipped my mind.
So Jesus rose on the 16th day of the first month, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, so now when we go into our history, or well, let's look at Millerite history first. So we know that we have some dates in Millerite history. We're not going to have specifically the 6th day of the first month marked with any event that I know of. We are going to have Pentecost marked, though. So Pentecost is going to be Samuel Snow's third letter is going to be written on Pentecost. Right. We do have Passover marked. So we actually have 2 Passovers. We have the Passover April 3rd, 1844, when Samuel Snow's first letter is republished in the Signs of the Time, having been published on, so that's going to be like the 16th day of, or pardon me, the 14th day of the 13th month on the proper calendar, but according to the Jews, they mark that as the 14th day of the first month in 1844. But Samuel Snow's first letter being written February 16th is going to be published February 22nd. The anniversary of that was yesterday. And that date is going to be the date in Ezra chapter 6 where they dedicate the temple. And then they're going to keep the Passover, whatever it is, it's 40 is it 41 days later or 40 days later? So it's going to be the third day of the 12th month to the 14th day of the first month. So I think it was 40 days, something like that. That makes sense. Because I think the 12th month has 29, well, it has 29 or 30 days. So the point is that in Ezra chapter 6, it's going to typify the publication of Snow's letters, but on the Sabbath that the Jews are going to keep in 1844. And then you have the first day of the first month in between that date and the true Passover, which is May 2nd, 1844, where Samuel Snow's second letter is going to be published, where he addresses the week of Christ and the center of the week being the 31st, right? So something that Miller didn't teach. So, but anyway, we don't have specifically marked the day after, right? We're going to have Passover marked as May 2nd. So May 4th would have been the day for the wave offering. But there's nothing that I know of in Millerite history on May 4th that marks that. But we do have Pentecost marked. So obviously May 4th still, even though there's not a letter or anything that I know of, it's still important in that sense. It still exists in Millerite history because Pentecost exists as a symbol. Okay, so in our history, how do we mark the 16th day of the first month on our lines? I know that's a broad question, but we're going to take Christ week, the week of Christ, and with the week of Christ, how do we connect that with our lines? Anybody know what I'm talking about?
I recall you have the 27 and the 31 and the 34.
Well, if
3.5 years, or guessing at the 3.5 years between 3.5. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Well, if you go with the third angel's message empowered at Christ's resurrection, then it would be the third angel's message at October the 22nd, wouldn't it?
Well, that's when
1844.
It's when it arrives. So the third angel's message in our history arrives October 22nd. It's formalized in 1888, and it's going to be empowered in our line. So our line is the fourth angel joins the third, it swells to a loud cry. It's really empowering the third angel. So that all of the history, our history is actually all about the empowerment of the third angel's message. So I take the resurrection of Christ to symbolize that empowerment, because we're going to have the resurrection in our history of the dead. Now here we have this chart. So this is the week of Christ study. Over here you can see there's the week of Christ. And then I continue taking Christ's last week, this period of time of his days in his last week. And I'm not going to explain the whole chart and how it works, but with this we had predicted Judas's betrayal on April 8th, being the 12th day of the first month. So the 16th day of the first month is April 12th, 2015. If we took it as a symbol, it could be that. I could do it other ways as well. Let me just see if I have another chart of this. No. So that's the best chart I have, I think. Let me see. Yes, the other ones I leave that out. So, but if we put it at 2015, right? So we're going to have this 2015, right? So now 2014 is May 2nd. So that was about the prediction before midnight, that Samuel Snow's Passover letter, right, in 1844. And the 17th day of the first month in 2014 is May 2nd. Let's see here if I got this right. Is this chart I made a long time? How am I doing that? I'm trying to remember. Oh, no, it's not May 2nd. But I'm just putting it there as the symbol, the Passover from 1844 being mixed. So it's not really the 17th day of the first month. It's the Passover. It's a little bit confusing how I did this. I don't know how to explain it otherwise. Yeah, so what I'm marking is that May 2nd is this center of a chiasm, which is the midst of the week study. And so it's a long story. I'm not going to go into that. But what we can say then is 2015 is typifying the 16th day of the first month. Now, or it has the 16th day of the first month. So the 16th day of the first month being 2015. We generally don't talk about 2015, but obviously the last week of Christ goes from the 9th day of the first month to the 16th day of the first month. That is, the triumphal entry is on the 9th day of the first month, and his resurrection's on the 16th day of the first month. So that's an inclusive 8 days, right? Because he's resurrected on the eighth day. So the 15th day of the first month is obviously the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right? So on the top we have things going left to right as, oh, pardon me, yeah. On the top, yeah, we have the dates in the last week of Christ going from left to right, but the years going from right to left, right? So that people who aren't familiar with this, it could confuse them. So here, I'll put it this way. So back in 2017, we're going to understand Samuel Snow's letters. And in 2017, I'm going to be trying to understand the significance of the two Passovers. That is, we have the Passover that precedes the first day of the first month, and the Passover that follows the first day of the first month. So April 3rd and May 2nd. These are in Samuel Snow's letters. And they show the separation of the two classes, right? So the ones in Millerite history, for somebody to accept October 22nd, 1844 as the 10th day of the 7th month, could they have April 3rd as the Passover, the true Passover? Hopefully you guys aren't asleep.
Just thinking about it.
Because if the first day of the first month is April 19th, then the true Passover has to be May 2nd. But many Millerites.
That's on the 2014, right?
Well, I'm just dealing with 1844.
Okay.
Just dealing with 1844. So in 1844, we have two Passovers. Karaites and the Rabbinic Jews both have April 3rd as Passover. Only the Adventists have May 2nd as Passover. That is, the Jews and the Karaites begin the year on March 21st in 1844. And so Passover is 14 days later. That's going to be on April 3rd. So the Jews they start the year too early in 1844. The Adventists, because of a misunderstanding of how the Karaite calendar worked, believed they were using the Karaite calendar, but they were using the correct biblical calendar. They just didn't know it, right? So they're going to have a Passover later. But if you believe that April 3rd was Passover, then the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement, would have been September 23rd, right? Not October 22nd. So that means somebody who accepted the message, the second angel's message, had to have received the chronology connected with that message, right? Because for many people, after March 21st passed, they gave up. They're not going to be part of the tarrying time. They're not going to accept April 3rd. Now, there might be some people who initially hang on till April 3rd, but still leave. But I think the vast majority of Adventists after March 21st have left the message. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
Because
yes.
Miller's prediction really just goes to March 21st. Now, other people are going to extend it to April 3rd, and Miller will accept that, as they move forward. Stephen, do you have a comment?
Articles were aiming for April 18 around that time, or Domstig says April 17th.
Yeah.
As the end of 1843.
Yeah. So they didn't understand the calendar. Some people didn't understand it. They were trying to figure it out. How do they determine the first day of the first month? So some of them looked at the Farmer's Almanac, right? And they saw, we're going to have the new moon, right? But that new moon is just the astronomical new moon, right? So there wasn't an agreement how to determine the calendar. How do we know which day is the first day of the first month? They and and when they talk about the 18th, they're actually referring to at sunset on the 18th as well. You aware of that, Stephen?
Thanks. Yes. So that would be Domesday. He just says the periodicals were aiming for that date, but most people were following what Miller was saying, with the equinox being the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. So Miller was doing equinox to equinox, which really didn't make any sense. But, there was just a lack of understanding at that time. So, but when you have the 10th day of the 7th month as October 22nd, that means you must have April 19th as the first day of the first month. So after the passing of Miller's prediction, they refined their dates. So you could argue that some people, didn't really know about April 19th when it passed. And I think primarily their first disappointment is actually going to be March 21st for many Adventists who leave, right? Would you agree with that, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that would be the main date for the disappointment.
Yeah.
But for most people at that time.
The ones who leave, and the vast majority are going to leave the movement with the failure of March 21st. Now you're still going to have the ones who are hanging on, and they're going to have their disappointment because there are many Adventists who have already accepted the later date, and those ones will then experience their disappointment later. And this is not clear in the Adventist literature. That's one of the things that, even if you talk to the average Adventist scholar, they wouldn't get this right. There's, we could almost say this is like a special, you have to be a specialist almost to even know about this stuff, right? Because the average Adventist doesn't have a clue. And we didn't have a clue in the movement. In 2013, we didn't know about April 19th, right? Which is odd because we already know about October 22nd. But we had the first disappointment as May 21st. So there's something about this whole understanding. I mean, we're going into to understand what is being symbolized here. But we know that there's this connection of the Passover, but there's also the 16th day of the first month of the resurrection. Now, so when we look at this chart in front of us, it is, there's lots of things you have to pay attention to. But we know that 2014 is important. It marks the prediction before midnight. It's the center of a chiasm in Millerite history. In our history, it's a symbol of the prediction before midnight, and it happens to be the Passover in Millerite history. But we know that we also have 2017 as being a Passover, right? So 2017 is symbolizing the Passover. Now, why is that? It's just because it's the 14th day of the first month in the line of these. But that means the 16th day is going to be, 2 years earlier, which doesn't make sense when we start to apply it as a symbol, right? That is, we can see that this is going backwards because we have the days above there, the triumphal entry, the temple cleansing, all of these things are going this one direction, and yet you have the years going the other direction. So it makes it a little confusing, right? If that makes sense to people. So if we're going to take the 16th day of the first month as a symbol in our history, I don't know if we would just put it at like 2015, right? Because we don't have anything for 2016. So how would we apply it in our history, right? Because we got the 2014, 2017, 2016, April 11th, 15th day of the first month. The 2017 has a huge connection, which I'm not going to show here, but so it becomes significant being the 17th day of the first month. So what do we do with the 16th day of the first month? How would we apply it to our line? So we can say it represents our whole line in some way, but how would we do that? So when we look at Deuteronomy 16, verse 1, so let's do that. So we're going to take 161 or 16, the 16th day of the first month. We're going to look at Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is going to address the Passover. Observe the month of Aviv and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. For in the month of Aviv, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Thou shalt therefore sacrifice the Passover unto the Lord thy God. So even though this verse is not addressing the 16th day of the first month, it's going to be later in verse 10. We can see that we have the 16th day of the first month as a symbol in Deuteronomy 1, and it connects it to the Passover. So can we just say that the wave offering is a connection to the Passover, and that it's representing the resurrection in connection with the Passover, right? So if we look at 1 Samuel 16:1, which is where we're starting here, and we see this symbol, and we see that this is the rejection of Saul, and we're going to have this son of Jesse who's going to be a king, right? So one of Jesse's sons. What does that tell us as a symbol? I know this is a long process, but I wanted to be thorough about it. So we have this resurrection of Christ. We have David is going to be the one chosen. And even the whole process of the choosing is going to be interesting. So can we take 1 Samuel 16:1 and Deuteronomy 16:1 and the 16th day of the first month and tie them together in the way that we're doing? Is that significant? Or is this just a red herring? Are we chasing rabbits?
I don't know if we're chasing rabbits or gophers.
Well, you have David being raised up as a king, so that would go along with the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah, when David is typifying Christ, right? But we
Right.
also have Passover connected. And
You could
this
throw in Psalm 16 too. I will not leave my hell, etc.
Psalm 16, what?
I was thinking of Psalm 16 where it says, "Thou wilt not leave my soul in hell." Like it's talking about Christ's resurrection.
Yeah, well, it's not 16:1 though.
No, I didn't say 16:1, but I said 16.
Okay.
Well, 16:1 is talking about David, didn't it? Is it David?
Yeah, 1 Samuel 16:1 is talking about the fact that Saul is rejected and that there's going to be a new king anointed, a son of Jesse, right? And then chapter 16 is going to address that. So to me, it's the symbol 16 verse 1 that we're looking at. Now, you could also say 1 Samuel 16 is addressing the whole thing as well. But, so you got the 6 and the 1 there. But to me, it's just that we're dealing with David being anointed king. It's in 16:1. We see the symbol of the wave offering, and we're saying, is this significant? So either it's significant or it's not. So, I mean, we covered a lot of ground. Do we see it as significant still after everything that we looked at? Now, we still had some verses to look at. Matthew, what are these? 27:52, dealing with the resurrection. Those are the people that resurrected. They came out of the graves at Christ's resurrection, right? That's Matthew 27:52 and 53. We go into the holy city and appeared unto many. And then you gave
Coming out of the grave is like coming out of our dry, dead spiritual state, of the dry bones, so to speak, in Ezekiel 37.
Yeah, okay. So if you connect it with Ezekiel 37, it's a revival and a reformation. We already connected Ezekiel 37 with this history, right? And okay, so Ephesians 4:8, wherefore he saith, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. So, right, Hebrew expression there in Ephesians. Instead of a multitude, they just use the doubling of captivity. Two different words, because one's a verb and one's a noun. But okay, so if we're going to apply this symbol of the 16th day of the first month, we have another way in which we apply this to our history, and that's simply just attaching it to me. Now, we actually can attach it in other ways as well. So it has to do with the number of days that the manna fell, right? So we're going to have,
Could you tell us how many days that was? Because I've forgotten. I think it has a 457 in it, right?
yeah, it's 14,587. So it's 14400,
Thank you.
which is, like 1/10 of 144,000 plus 187, right? Now, it
Right.
depends if we're counting from the day that the manna first fell to the day that they go out to gather manna, and there is none, it's 14,588 cardinal days. It's a cardinal count. If we count the number of days from when the manna first fell as inclusive to the last day that it fell, and counting all the Sabbaths in between when it didn't fall, it's 14,587 days. So that 14,587 days is from the date that I was converted on August 11th, 1980 to July 18, 2020. And that date in which I was converted, there's this falling of the stars, the Perseid meteor shower, the most spectacular Perseid meteor shower ever recorded. And I was in the ideal location to view this Perseid meteor shower. And so then 14,587 is July 18, 2020.
So wouldn't those falling so-called stars parallel the falling of the whatever fireballs on Nashville?
Well, it could. I mean, I usually tie
it's a stretch.
falling of the stars. But it's also a symbol, it's a sign, right?
Right.
And so that's one way in which we apply that period of time. We can connect it with me personally. We also had connected it, trying to remember how else we did it. I thought there was another place we placed it, but I don't see it right now. Oh yeah, there was just in connection with, if we went from, so this just had to do with November 9th, 1989. If we count 14,588 days, it brings us to the 10th day of the 7th month in 2029. So I had noted that, whatever that means, right? But it was just another way in which we could take the 494 months as a symbol. And it's also, how did I do that? I don't even know what that means. Okay, so when we deal with it, it is obviously a symbol of chronology. It's a symbol of something that we have understood that hasn't been understood. It's a key that unlocks things in connection with Pentecost. Oh, that was the other point. So we have the wave offering. I don't know why I forgot to mention this one. So we know that Stephen had used the date in the time of Christ for Pentecost, and he's going to count the number of years, prophetic years, minus the days of atonement from the day of Pentecost when Jesus ascends into heaven, or not when he ascends into heaven, when the disciples, receive the Holy Spirit 10 days after Jesus ascends into heaven. But Christ is going to he's going to inaugurate his ministry at that time. So when the Holy Spirit is being poured out on the disciples, the sanctuary in heaven is being anointed, right? That's what Ellen White says. So that's the beginning of his ministry in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary. And so then Stephen said, well, we're going to take the holy place ministry and we're going to get rid of all the days of atonement in that period of time. And where would it lead up to? Now it's going to lead up to 1844. Well, it's long. I'm not going to go into all the calculations right now. But the point is, it gave us some symbols that connected with October 22nd, 1844. And it also gave us then the number of days from 1844. That is 1800 and is it 1844 days that you count to November 9th, 1849? Can you explain it, Stephen? I can't hear you.
So the average, there's like 60. Can you hear me?
Yep, now I can.
Okay. So the number of days when Christ was in the holy place was 66,000. No, 66 600 so 662,314 days.
Right.
And then I just divided that by 359, which typifies the number of days in the holy place.
Yeah.
You know, and
And
so
then you
you
get
get
844.
yeah, so you get 1844 days as an average, and then there's a bit over, so it's like 21 hours, 15 minutes, and about 33 seconds to the nearest second.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that, when you put it on a clock, looks like the cross, if you're on the right side of the cross looking up, if you put it on
Yes.
that. Not
So
a digital.
yeah,
Digital.
yeah. So basically, one day in the type typified 1844 days, 21 hours, 15 minutes, and 33 seconds.
Yeah. Which would mark the time of Christ's crucifixion, sort of thing, right?
You see parallels there around the time he died anyway, because he died in
Yeah.
the ninth hour. So the 21 hours would be the ninth hour.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So we have there then this connection with Pentecost, and Pentecostal, of course, is connected with the wave offering. So it ties the history and the time of Christ to 1844 in a way that's never done before, right? Nobody had ever tried that before. Okay, and then we also have then 1844 days from October 22nd, 1844, which is those 359 days of that's that one day that's left over. So 1844 of those, right? And that brings us to November 9th, 1849, right? If we count from October 22nd, which now you had that date, right? Back in 2018, but you didn't put it as November 9th, 2019, you're saying.
Yes, I think that's I originally just put 1849, November 9th. It's
Yeah,
only
but you had the November 9th date. And of course you did know about November 9th, 1989.
well, that became significant after tests.
Only after tests?
Yes, because then I think I sort of then seen it was like 140 years and sort of made parallels. Then after that, I think because it wasn't really. I don't think I made it. Well, I was more tying it to just being significant to 1989.
Okay. So you're saying that the movement never thought about November 9th, 1989 until Tess brought it up?
2019, she emphasized November 9th.
Yeah, but I'm saying November 9th, 1989. Did we ever talk about November 9th, 1989?
I think after tests focused on 2019, that's when I kind of I had like a connection to 1989 with it and just in thought, but I hadn't really worked out any logic, any
Yeah,
structure.
so you didn't work out a structure of 30 years, but did we know that the wall fell on November 9th, 1989? Did we mark that event as the start of, like we did, didn't we? I mean, like it wasn't just that it was 1989, we marked the day that the wall fell,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, I had sent when the time setting came in, so it wasn't this is before tests presented. I had sent an email to Parminder concerning that study and suggested that the Christ was going to come back in the 9th of November, 1849.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
yes, based upon that, because he was sort of arguing 1863, the Lord could have came. You know, that was one of his teachings at the time, back in 2018.
Okay.
But he never clicked on it. He never responded to me. But he knew he already had been doing studies with Tess that he knew that she was going to point towards the 9th of November,
Yeah.
2019.
Yeah, to her 29th.
But he never, he never said, "Well, that's amazing," because Tess is thinking about this, whatever. You know, he never said anything like that. You know.
Yeah.
He just never responded.
Yeah, and it could have been just they didn't want other people to
Yes, I think we see that
free
that was, yeah.
receive them. Okay. Well, anyway, well, thanks for that background. Okay, well, we'll come back to this tomorrow. But let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, again, we are so grateful and for each person. And we just ask that you can continue to be with us throughout this day and help us in our personal studies. May your angels watch over us, and may we do your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.